Howdy everyone, this is Ari Danish with Side Effects, and I've been getting a lot of requests to kind of do a review of Houdini H16 Heightfields, or just say terrains in other words. I did this tutorial a long time ago, and it was in the process of terrain development and not everything was still locked down, so I thought I would go and do this little review. Okay, so here I am in Houdini, and the first thing to know is go to desktop, and we have a terrain desktop right here. And it's minus all the clutter. And if you remember, with terrains, I'm into this 3-2-3 approach where we really kind of blurred the lines between 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions and go back and forth. So in this desktop, you'll see that there's 2 vertical bars here. And this will open your panel to look at your cops when you're doing 2-dimensional stuff. I'll close that for right now, just letting you know it's there. And go back up to the object level. And I'm going to drop down a height field. Now, notice up here in our desktop, there's also terrain tools, which will have all the icons for almost all the height fields operators. And there's the terrain layer tools. And if you just want to see, a quick and dirty how to do something, you could always, and I'll just drop down this height field and delete it. You could always say, okay, I'm curious how to do a terrain moonscape. So, you could click on this, and you get something that kind of looks like this with all the pot shots, and the network will be there for you to dive in and learn from. Okay, but I'm going to do everything from scratch. So I'll go discard and new. And at the object level, again, I'll drop down a height field object. And the only thing that a height field object is if you look at it, really, is a geometry object. And if we dive inside, there's a height field SOP already put in there for you. And I'll hit Space G to center it in the viewport. And now you'll notice that there's a few key things here. The orientation's on the ZX axis, which kind of makes sense for terrains. The default size is a kilometer, 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters. And the voxel sizing, you could do it by axis. So you could say, I want 512 voxels across. Or you could say by size, and the grid says a spacing of 2, says basically every other unit is going to have a voxel. And we did it 2 because in the early development there was a Mac bug that it couldn't go any lower than that and have erosion work. But now you could do 4 also. But to tell you the truth, 2 is pretty low. And that's where I like to start working. Okay, so now that I have the height field, how could I get some terrain in, or something to look at? Well, there's a few different approaches. You could do everything from scratch. You could do something like bring in your 3D geometry. So here's a torus that I'll bring in, and let's make the torus, let's say 250 meters by, 75 meters here. So you can see it. And the first thing to notice is if you look at the torus, there's a little kind of grayish output dot here, but the height field has a green dot right there. The green dot means it's a volume 2D. It's a nice little slice of a volume. And this one means it's real geometry. So these two don't mix. You're going to have to convert your torus into some type of height field. And the way to do that is by just going height field. And you see if you hit type HF, you'll get all the height fields here, or tab, and you can go to terrain. And what we're going to look for is height field 3D project. So I'll go down here. And there it is, height field project. And notice the height field project has a green input and a gray input. So you just wire the green input to the green. So that's where the volume goes. And here comes the torus. And you can see what's really cool is now it basically kind of did a raise up of your 3D geometry into your volume 2D. And you got a little raised area. If I dropped here a transform, and I just move this up, you can see that is just projecting from wherever the torus is. If I rotate this and bring it down, you can pretty much do whatever you want there. Okay, I'll change that back to 0. If I go below the Heightfield, though, nothing is appearing. So for things to appear in the Heightfield, I'll go back to the Heightfield project here and change this and turn off hit farthest. And then combine method would be minimum. And now you can see I could get valleys. Just like that. Now, when I do this, I have a little problem. That doesn't look really clean. It looks really jaggedy because of the resolution of the voxels. Now, you might say, well, that looks okay to me, but when you do erosion, this is going to really kind of affect the erosion, and you kind of want, your masses to be a bit on the smooth side. So I could drop down to Heightfield blur. And I'll just blur it out a bit and make it back nice and smooth. Which brings up another concept here. When you look at a Heightfield, and I go to information, a Heightfield comes with 2 layers, 2 sets of voxels, one for height and one for mass. That's built in. You could add a lot more on your own, and erosion will add also a lot more, like bedrock, water, and so forth. But height and mass are what comes right out the gate. So the height obviously affects the height here. But what does mass do? Well, when we did a blur, we're blurring this area. But let's say we only want to blur a certain specific area. And you can see that Heightfield blur has 2 inputs here. Okay. And there's this nice little icon here. If you just want to paint in your area to mask, you can just click on this icon, and now you'll get a Heightfield mask paint. And you can see now there's nothing here being blurred because at the Heightfield mask paint there is no mask. So I could go here just like the paint tool, hold down the shift key, left mouse drag right to make the brush bigger or larger. And now when I paint, you can see I'm painting a mask, and I'll paint it in a few different areas. And now if I go blur, you can see I blurred out those areas. Okay, so that's the 3-dimensional way of bringing in things. Let's talk about the 2D method of doing it. Okay, so I'm going to go here and drop down a cop net. There we go. And I'm going to dive inside it. And I'll open up my view of this right here. And I don't know, let's put down a shape. Triangle's good. And we look at the shape by default. Here, image. It's 1920 by 1080 is our defaults here. And usually our terrains are tiled with a square. So why don't I make this, I don't know, just 1,000 by 1,000. So there's my shape again. And I'll add a blur. Let's add a radial blur. So I get something that looks like that. That's pretty cool. Quality. Make the quality a little higher. And I'll make the angular blur to 45. Okay. Now I'll go here and just add a null. And in my null, I'll just call this out triangle. Good enough. go back up here to where I have a Heightfield. There's another type of terrain tool called a Heightfield file. And let's go and find it right there. And I could go here and say my source is not a file, but a cop. And it'll look internally for you. Go here, Heightfield file, cop to net, out try, export relative, accept. And if I look at it, if I put the display flag on it, doesn't look like anything happened here. Okay. The reason is, if we look here, everything's good. The luminance, the size, uniform scale, the height scale, it's set to 1 meter. You're really not going to see a 1 meter variation here on a kilometer by kilometer. So let's make this, I don't know, 100 meters. And now you can see that pattern that we just created. Just like that. So that's a way to bring in 2D or images. And if you did something in Photoshop or something like that, you would just change this cop to a file. Cool. So the third way is we could take this now and we could just start adding noises, a Heightfield noise. So here I added some sparse convolution to the triangle to make it look more interesting. And you can see the amplitude is set to 500. If we set it to 200, you would see your triangle more, but it's still looking, kind of natural. Yeah, I don't know, 300. Break it up. There you go. And then the element size is the period of the noise. So you can see as I decrease it, you're going to get a lot more noise. Increase it, it's going to be smoother. And by default, noise is centered. And what that means is it's centered around 0. So you keep the original shape. So if I turn this off, you can see that it jumps up. And for sparse convolution, you don't want that. I'm going to turn it back on. I'm going to add one more noise to show you the difference here. And let's bring down the noise again to something like that. And that is, I could also drop down another noise called Heightfield noise. And this time, let's add like a Worley noise. Now, Worley noise, you don't want to have the center noise, just turn it back to here. And now you can see that it's dramatically changing it because of the nature of Worley noise. So let's make this just a little 100. And if you want lots of little frequencies to break it up, there you go. Okay, after a little while, your noise is going to be all over the place, and what I like to do is do a Heightfield remap. And a Heightfield remap, what it's going to do is you're going to go here, it's going to affect the height, a layer. You're going to say compute range, and it's going to say the range right now is between minus 35 and 177. I'm going to say, you know what, I want it to start out at 0, so remap it to 0 for me. And if I want to keep it, basically the same, maybe 200, give me the elevations. And I want a solid basin here, and there's no like solid level floor here. That's what this ramp is for, to redistribute the wealth. So that's a really nice way of just carving out areas of hills versus, the flat level area. Okay. So right now I have two distinct Heightfields. I got this Heightfield from the triangle and the Heightfield from this little canvas area here. This 3D projected, the Torus, I should say. I could do here a Heightfield layer. And the layer is going to say, give me a base terrain and a terrain to layer. So let's say this was the base, and this is the one to add. And it'll say layer mode replace. I could add the two together to get something that looks like this. And yeah, I could do other things like subtract. The difference is not going to give you much of a difference. Multiply doesn't make sense here because the values are going to be, not between 0 and 1, so it's going to be astronomical. The maximum of the two, the minimum of the two, and blend, where you could blend these things together. That one actually looks pretty cool. I think I'm going to keep that. Okay, so now what we could do is we could say, well, I want some terracing. So I'm going to go here and do a Heightfield terrace. Just put it in here. And I don't know the area I want to terrace. So either I could use a draw mask, which is a two-way of drawing something. So there's three ways for me to create a mask. We did the 3D already. We could do the paint, which is that little icon up here. Or we could actually draw a vector. So I could say here, draw mask. And draw mask is going to expect, again, a volume. And it really doesn't matter. It could be this guy. Just needs to be a 1K by 1K, so it's the same size. Wired in here. And then, let's say I want to draw the mask around this area. And so we got the area we want. First thing you do is compute range. And so now you can see that I have a terrace that's going all the way up and bottom. Then I could say what the minimum height is and the maximum height. So let's say I don't want it to start off the bat there. So somewhere, let's start the terracing here. And we want it also to go all the way to top. So somewhere I just want a few terraces like that. And the step size. So let's say every 10 meters. So that's a little too small. Try 20. There we go. And then how smooth I want the edges. And with those small steps, I need to reduce the smooth edges. And now I have some terracing right there. Once I did that, if I want to create another mask, a nice tool to use is the Heightfield Clear mask. Layer clear right here. Oops, mask clear. And that will just get rid of it so you can see what we have. Another really cool utility to use is the Heightfield pattern. With the Heightfield pattern, as you can see, what it does is create these patterns such as stars or ramps or steps. Lots of different things you could play with. But again, you want a mask to say what area. So this time I'm going to put down a box. And I'll make this box maybe 100 by 100 by 100. That looks a little small, so let's make it 250 by 250 by 250. So there's my box. And what I'm going to do is use my box to make a mask. So again, I'm going to go here, Heightfield, draw mask. Heightfield mask by object. So I'm going to drop that down. And again, what it wants is Heightfield and the object. So there it is. I'll put a transform on this guy. And now when I do my Heightfield pattern, you can see that it affects only that area. And this is really cool. You'll see the speed of this is as I move this around. Heightfield transform. It does these really cool updates wherever I need it to be. And somehow I hit the pivot to be here, so let's go there. And anything else I need to do with my transform? Let's move up the Y to 0. There we go. So back to my pattern here. I'll say I want some steps, which is what I'm getting right there, but I'm not really happy with those steps. So let's go to the I got multiple transforms. That's what's going on. I'll put the steps there. And say combine with, I'm going to say add. So we're going to add the steps there. Or maybe we want some cellular noise, just like that, to be added. So let's do that. The cellular noise, I'll say the size, like that. The wall thickness, bring it in a bit. Okay, that's too much. Drop down the noise just so we get a little more variation there. So pattern is a really useful thing to just get some subtlety going quickly or fill in a boring area. Okay, I'm starting to like this. So now what I'm going to do, besides save, is I'm going to now do my first erosion. So I'm going to drop down a Heightfield erode. And I'm going to go to my visualization, compute the range. Then in erosion, I'm going to say, my first time through, I just want to kind of even this out. I'm going to turn off my hydro erosion and just do my thermal erosion. And I might make this, just to get it to go quickly, a scalar multiplier my thermal by 3. And everything else here looks good. Turn on my real-time flag because this is a simulation and hit play. And what you can see is it quickly just is the heat and cold cycles of the thermal erosion. It's just going to knock everything down a bit. So I'll stop the recording, get this to run a few more frames, and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. So here it is. It's knocked down a bit. It's looking decent. Don't need to see my cops right now, so I'll just go here so you can see this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a stash. You could also use a time shift, whichever you prefer, to save the current state at frame 12 so I can bring this back to frame 1 and nothing happens. And then I'm going to do a Heightfield resample. And the Heightfield resample allows me to increase the fidelity of this. So I'm going to go resolution scale. If I change this to 2, see if I can show you this. So right now you can see that the erosion that we did had added a height mask, a mesa, a cliff, a bedrock layer, a flow layer, water, and debris. The voxel size right now is 1 million. So now if I go here to this Heightfield resample and do the information, you can see that it's now a lot larger. It's 2000 by 2000, so it's 4 million voxels. So I just doubled the scale of this, or the resolution, I should say. So now if I do another erode, and this time what I'm going to do is in my erosion, I'm going to turn off the thermal because we already settled everything down. I'm going to have my hydro going, and I'll make it 2 just to speed things up. You don't have to do that. Precipitation. I'm not going to want a high amount of water to evaporation rate, so I'm going to change this to like 5 to a 4, so it's just a little water going through. Everything else is good there. The entrainment rate, I'm going to make it, I don't know, 0.6 just to increase it a little. That's how quickly the debris falls down. And the repose angle, just so you can see it quicker, I'm going to make it to 45. And now we'll rerun it again. And this time it's going to take longer. So again, I will stop the recording and come back in a bit. Okay, I'm back, and we can see that a lot of erosion has occurred. We get the nice veining here. Nice here. So what if you want to see what are the effects of each one? To do that, you could drop down to Heightfield Visualize. Say compute range. Like that. And then you can start picking your layers. So let's say I want to see where my cliffs are. Or, I don't know, let's see, I did a mesa. What did I do here? Oh, I don't have my visibility flag on. There we go. Now you can see it. There's my mesa. No mask because we removed that. There's the cliffs of the mesa. If you want to see, let's say, water, if there's any water there. Yep, there's little water bits here and there. Remember, we made the evaporation rate really quickly here. If we wanted to see the flow, there's the flow. And debris would be here. And there's the bedrock. So that's the way you could see each of the different layers and how they got affected. Once you are happy with the terrain and you want to output it, there's several ways to do it. First way is you could use a Heightfield output. And you could say save to disk and give it a file name. And then you're going to say what each of these layers are going to be. So let's call this terrain.exr. So you might want the Heightfield in the red channel. And where it says output range, you want to do an auto remap from 0 to 1 usually. And then maybe you want to do in the green channel, maybe you just want the flow or the debris. Again, auto remap. The blue channel, you could say maybe you want, to be able to specify where the bedrock areas are. And we'll just do one more just for the fun of it. We'll say where the cliffs are. And if you need to divide it into different maps, that's what you do down here. Save to disk. And I should have said where I want to save it. Let's try that one more time. Did I forget that? And there it is. So if I were to open this up, probably the best place to open it up is mplay. So Alt New, and we'll go to Applications, Houdini, Image Viewer, Desktop, and there's the composite. Here is your Heightfield, your, I think that was our bedrock, can't remember anymore, and your different layers. So that worked out really well. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is I'm happy with it. I could drop down a CopNet again. And dive inside here and do a SOP import. And a SOP import, I'll go and look for my Erode2, export file path, and let's bring out the cops here again. So this SOP import will bring in a Heightfield, as you can see, but it's all distorted right now. So what you want to do is click on this button called Set Resolution from SOP, and now it's the right resolution. But right now everything is a color field and an alpha. So if I say Set Planes from SOP, now you'll see you have all your planes to work with. And so you could do your image processing here and output, as a ROP file output each of your layers to different images if you want also, as just a cop image. Okay, another way. What if I want to save this as a 3D image? Or a 3D geometry, I should say. Let's close this down. I could go instead and just do a convert Heightfield. And there it is as geometry. And then I could do all my tricks as polyreduce and so forth. A nice thing is if we open up the spreadsheet here, you can see that each of the points has a point attribute for flow, debris, cliffs, so you can also use that to continue processing. Last thing I want to show you is how to scatter points onto your volume. It will actually turn out to be geometry, but let's do it. So I'm going to do let's zoom back in. I'm going to do a Heightfield mask by feature. And this is a really nice Swiss Army knife to get your masks in. So I'm going to say here, I don't want anything in the extreme angle, so I'm going to kind of reduce my slope from maybe to 50 degrees here and reduce this so I get something like that. And then I'm going to say mask by height. I'm going to compute the range. And I don't want anything below 0, let's say, so I'm going to knock out those areas. And then I'm going to go back here and say mask by direction. And find a nice angle that I want to put my scatter on. That was nice, actually, right over there. So in that direction, and maybe just a little wider. So nothing really scattered here, but over here. So there's my mask, and then I'll go here, Heightfield scatter. And as you can see, my points are being scattered just in those areas. I could change this again to exact count, 10,000. And now maybe that's where I want to place my trees or so forth. So that's a really nice way of marking up the areas for different type of decorations. Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll maybe make a follow-up video.